We're going to continue in our sermon series this month entitled Love Thy Neighbor, and I want to apologize in advance for my voice. I have a sinus infection. Don't be thinking the preacher's spreading stuff around, okay? That's not what it is. I have a sinus infection. The doctor told me so. So with that being said, hopefully my voice holds up. If not, you'll get the Diet Coke version of it, and if not, hopefully you're going to get the full classic. So today we're going to be talking about love thy neighbor, and this whole month we're looking at ways that we as Christians can love our neighbors better. You know, I believe that all of us can do a better job at loving our neighbors than I do, and then we do. And some of you, you could really take it up about 10 notches because you maybe struggle with your neighbors. So last week we talked about how we can show love to those who are lonely. And in Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40 says this. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Church, today we're going to be talking about embracing the orphans. You know, we talked about today being Compassion Day, where you have an opportunity where you can sponsor a child. But I want you to know it's more than just that little note card. It's a lot more than all those other things that you heard about already. Do you realize in the United States alone, there are 400,000 kids who are in need of homes? They do not have families. And then do you realize this? There are far more Christians in the United States of America than there are those children who need homes. And I believe personally, the church can make a difference. And today what I want to do, my goal is to show you that God, for his church, his plan for his church is that we are plan A. And when it comes to taking care of the widows, the orphans, and those who are lost, you realize that the church, and you and I, we are the church. That is God's plan A. Have you ever been plan A? Maybe. You've been plan B, maybe plan C. Yeah, maybe you've been plan Z. I'll be praying for you if that is something that you've been in that situation in life. I want to show you that the church is God's plan A to help all the children who are in need. If you'll look with me at James chapter 1, verse 27, it says this. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after the orphans and the widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So it says, James says the purest form of religion is for us Christians to take care of the widows and the orphans, and even more importantly, for us to keep ourselves pure from the temptation of sin. So God is telling us right there that caring for those in need is something that's very close to his heart. Caring for those who are in need is close to God's heart. And do you realize, for you and I, that should be a priority? Do you also realize this, that is actually born in your spirit? Remember, God programmed us. It is born in our spirit to take care of those who are close to the heart of God. If I showed you a picture today of some of those compassion kids we have and put names and faces and situations, there's one kid named Jonathan, and he's from Uganda. He does not have a father, and he has to work, so he can't go to school to get an education. And then there's another girl, her name's Marcella, and she is from Central America. And her grandmother's raising her, and she also has to work to put food on the table. And so these names and these faces all have stories. And do you realize, church, those 400,000 kids that I told you about earlier in the United States of America, they all have names, they all have faces, and they all have stories. And so if we were to put all the pictures up there, what happens is this. Many of you say, hey, I want to help. I'm in because it touches your heart. You actually got a visual. You heard the story. You understand the background of it. But I believe, church, with all my heart, that God calls on us as the church to be about the business of those who are in need. This week I wrote down some of the biggest problems that are going on in our world today, in our society. The biggest problems, and there's so many of them. And I want you to think, as I'm reading this list to you, who pays the highest price for these issues? There's broken families, there's fatherlessness, there's divorce, there's poverty, there's substance abuse, there's homelessness, there's incarceration, there's gang violence, racism, human trafficking, and the list goes on and on and on. We could talk about that all day. But do you realize who pays the highest price for all those situations, for all those problems? It's children. Those who did not cause the problems, those who do not have the ability to solve the problems, they're the ones who are hurt more by those problems than anybody. And again, I want to tell you, God tells us that the church is plan A. In Psalm 82, if you'll check this out with me, Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4 says this. It says, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And I believe that all of you, all of us, some of you might be stinkers. I know, dude. I know who you are. But I believe we are all good human beings, and we care when someone's in need. I want to show you a picture up on the screen. That's my dog, Zora. She's an old lady now. She was growing up wild and rambunctious. You know, she's like a 3-year-old that's all hopped up on sugar. That's how she was when she was younger. She was always just jumping around and thinking you're playing with her. I mean, it would make you so angry you could hit her as hard as you want to. She'd come back and say, oh, let's play. You know what I'm talking about? And this dog, she's always wanting attention. Last night, Mary and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and this dog is sitting there. I'm talking to Mary. We're just talking about whatever. And this dog is just sitting there staring at me. And I just look down at her, I touch her head, and then I go back to talk to Mary, and I look back, and if she was a human being, I would get a restraining order against her. I'm serious, it's creepy. I'm like, what do you want from me? And so this dog, Zora, she's one of these dogs that she likes to play. And so if you're just sitting there being bored, I'll be like, hey, Zora, get him. And she jumps up her tail wagging, and she like sniffing around the house like she's gonna get something in the house. And so a lot of times I'll go outside and we'll be doing landscaping, and she's out there with me, and to keep her occupied because she's like a child, I'll be like, hey, Zora, get him. And she's running around sniffing in the grass and the weeds. And this one day we were out in the yard, and Mary and my son Joshua was out there. We were just moved into the parsonage, and I want to keep her there because I don't want the neighbors to hate me. I'm like, Zora, get him. So she starts sniffing in this bush, and she's just going crazy. All of a sudden, my dog got into a nest of baby bunnies. She wasn't trying to kill them, but she would grab one lightly, and she's just throwing them out, right out of the bush. And so instantly, we go into panic mode. I yell at Joshua, go get a box, and you save the bunnies, save the bunnies. And we're all running around. We're scooping up bunnies. We're putting them back, and she grabs them, brings them back out. We put them in a box, and we're going to take care of them. Guess what? We didn't do a good job because all of them died. I guess I'm not the bunny whisperer, but we went into panic mode to save those bunnies. And of course, bunnies are cute, aren't they? I mean, they're adorable. They got them little tiny ears, and they're soft, and they just sit there. And why wouldn't we save the bunnies? You know, why wouldn't we save the whales? Why wouldn't we save the spotted owls, right? Church, listen to me. Why wouldn't we save the children? Why wouldn't we rescue the needy, defend the weak, care for the fatherless? You know, it's easy in our world for things to be out of sight and out of mind because we're busy, aren't we? We go through life and we're moving at breakneck speeds, and we got to get this done, got to get this done. And we tend to overlook things that are right in front of us. This past week, I did a test on the staff. Right outside this door here, there was this long piece of plastic. It looked like someone wrecked their car in the parking lot. So if it's yours, I can give it to you. It's in my office, okay? This big, long piece of plastic. And I usually always bend over and pick up what's there. And I said, I'm going to see. And we all day long, we're all waiting out the doors. Nobody picked it up. And so I said to one of them, I said, hey, We're walking and I couldn't take it anymore. I said, did you see that there? And they're like, oh, no, I didn't see that. I'm like, you stepped over it every single time you walked out the door. And I'm joking when I'm talking about that, but you know what, church? How often do we almost trip over something and don't even see it? Someone who's lonely, someone who's in need, someone who's desperately in need of rescuing. Do you know that God, our God, cares about children more than you and I probably even know? He tells us that, but we don't even fathom it. And he calls upon his church to be plan A. See, there are children, of course, who need help with physical needs. There's children who need help with physical needs, whether it's a Compassion International or whatever. But I want to talk to you about something I read this week, and it really blew my mind. I was reading something, and that there was something called a spiritual orphan. A spiritual orphan. I'm like, that intrigued me. So I look up what a spiritual orphan is. Check this out. The definition of a spiritual orphan is this: one that does not have someone to guide them spiritually. One who does not have someone to guide them spiritually. Church, in this world, we are surrounded by spiritual orphans. We really are. We're spiritual orphans. Our communities are filled with spiritual orphans. Church, our schools are filled with spiritual orphans. You come here on Wednesday night to a youth program. I'm telling you right now, our youth program is filled with spiritual orphans. Romans chapter 8, verse 15 tells us this. It says, the spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. Church, do you realize as a Christian, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you've been adopted? Do you realize that God, your Father, has adopted you? He has brought you into the family, into the sonship. And it goes on to tell us in the Bible that you are co-heirs to his treasure. You and I, that means we share it. We are co-heirs to God's treasure. So every single one of us, we have been adopted. We've been adopted. And do you know this? Listen to me. Do you realize that sometimes we don't even act like it? You know, when you've been through something yourself and then you watch somebody else going through it, you're kind of like, oh man, I know how you feel. I remember I went through that. That's awful. Church, since you were adopted by your Heavenly Father, when you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, when you became adopted, how come we forget what it was like before we were adopted? Why do we forget how cold it is, how lonely it is, how much void is in our life? And so do you realize that we're surrounded by spiritual orphans that we need to bring through the adoption process? How do you spot a spiritual orphan? So if you're like, all right, you tell me you're spiritual orphans, but how can I recognize someone who's a spiritual orphan? It's not necessarily by rough clothes, maybe they don't have nice clothes. It's not necessarily whether their house is nice or they're dirty. It has nothing to do with that. I want to give you the signs of a spiritual orphan. And as I'm reading these to you, I'm telling you, you can come to our youth group on Wednesday night and you can spot every single one of these. The first sign of a spiritual orphan is this: competing or in need to stand out. That they always got to be standing out. I need someone to notice me, recognize me, see me for who I am. Or they have either heavy isolation or extreme independence. They're on polar opposites. I mean, they are heavy on one end or the other. Where they want to be isolated and nobody likes me, I'm just going to sit here and be quiet. Or they're completely independent, nobody's telling me what to do. You know what I'm talking about? The third thing is this: they struggle with fear and insecurity. Afraid of everything. Always feeling insecure about who they are, who they were created to be. And the fourth thing is this: performance orientation, meaning, I got to perform for you to like me. I'll do all these things just so you'll like me. Please like me. Tell me I'm worth it. Tell me I'm good enough. Church, you don't have to go far to see these kids. They're all around us. So I want you to think about something. What if you What if the church, remember, we are the church. What if we could be an answer to a child's deepest prayer? What if you and I could be the answer to a child's deepest prayer? Maybe someone who's saying, man, child's praying, God, give me a family. Could you do that? Maybe it's a child praying like, God, give me a place to belong, something that I could be part of. I'm asking you, church, could you do that? What if it's just that you personally could be an answer to prayer, someone to give a rip, a child saying, I just wish somebody cared about me. Maybe you're not called to foster or do in-home adoption in your house. Listen, don't be offended, but most of you aren't. Don't be offended. Offense leads to other sins that God don't want you to have. But what if you pray and say, God, how can I be involved? What if you pray like, Lord, tell me what I can do. Tell me what it is that I need to do. In church, I've told you so many times from this pulpit, when you pray and ask God a question, you better be ready for the answer. And there's a lot of times you aren't going to like it. You're like, God, what do you want me to do? He's like, oh, I thought you'd never ask. You know, why do you think your teenage kids will never come and you say, my dearest mother, my amazing father, is there something I can do in the house for you? Because they don't want to do it. A lot of us, we don't pray to God. God, what do you want me to do? Because we don't want to be involved. Life's easier when you're not involved, right? If I just sit here and make it look good. If I come to church and I take my shower and put on clean clothes, look good, feel good, smell good, I'm in church, that's good enough. I'm telling you, you pray and say, God, what do you want me to do? And before you say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to ask you, just pray. See, there are ways all of us can get involved. What I love about our church, I believe Wellsville First Christian Church does a phenomenal job at this. I really do. I think you guys are awesome. There's so many people in this church who have let God use them. I want to share a couple of them with you. I remember several years back, I came home from work and my wife, Mary, she's a school teacher. It was getting ready to be close to summer break. And she said, hey, I want to tell you something, just listen. Guys, whenever your wife says, I want to tell you something, just listen. That means she's wanting you to shut up because she's probably going to give you bad news or something that you're not going to want to do. She said, just listen. She said, I went to this meeting today. There's these kids. They live over in Russia. They were affected by the Chernobyl nuclear accident. And I want to bring one to our house. They speak no English whatsoever. And they're going to come to our house, and we're going to pay for everything, their medical, their food, their clothes, their airfare, everything. And after I said, you're crazy. I said, that's the dumbest thing. How are you going to talk to them? How are you going to tell this kid you got to go to the bathroom? Right? All the simple things. I said, you're nuts. But then I looked at her, I said, I'm a smart husband. I said, but baby girl, it's your summer. You do what you want to do. So my wife brought Oleg, the first one over. Our oldest son, Jordan, he had to share everything with Oleg. But I want to tell you, I was blessed. I was blessed by it. So much so, we got 2 more after that. Albert Carr, many of you don't know Albert Carr. Albert Carr is a wonderful guy. Albert Carr fostered 23 kids in his lifetime. He and his wife could not have any kids. They fostered 23 kids. And listen how wild God is. About 5 years ago, he comes up to me, he said, hey, see that lady over there, you know her? I'm like, no, today's her first day. He goes, I think she was one of my foster kids. So I said, let's go ask her. I went over and said, hey, introduced myself. Her name's Barb Price. And she was one of the kids that Albert fostered many, many years ago. Debbie Mick. Many of you know Debbie Mick. Debbie got a love for kids a mile long. Taught 4th grade at West Point for many, many years. Always involved, always doing for the kids. Debbie Mick used to load up, and she lived up the road from me growing up. She used to load up a car. I don't even know what kind of big car she had. It was filled with kids, and she would take us to a youth program on Thursday evenings. She even stopped by and picked up Mark Blakeley and Corey Blakeley when we probably didn't deserve to be picked up in her car. But you know what? It was for a love of kids, and she still is working with the youth. I didn't ask the permission on this one either. Jen Boggs, your husband said I could do it. Take it up with him. She was my son's soccer coach. But she was more than a soccer coach. She loved them kids. She invested in them kids. Kid would come, didn't have any shoes. There was a miracle next week. There were shoes sitting on the bench for him. Jen Boggs bought their shoes. And she loved those kids and supported them and was faithful, encouraged them. Now Jen Boggs is no longer the soccer coach, but she's a youth coach here at Wellsville First Christian Church, doing the same thing. Invested in kids, going way out of her way to invest. One last one I want to share with you from our church. I know there's many of you. Jerry Rayburn Jr. Jerry came up to me. How old are you, Jerry? 20? He's around here somewhere. I think he's 20. He came to my office. He said, God's calling me to work with kids, but I don't know in what capacity. I said, here's a good deal. We're hiring at Lighthouse Kids right now. And here's what's kind of unique. In daycare, there's not a whole lot of dudes that step into that job. Jerry took the job. He is a stinking rock star with these kids. They love him. He's a male figure when a lot of them don't have it. And he plays with them, runs on that playground. People ask me, hey, who's the big kid over there? Shouldn't he graduate out of Lighthouse Kids, right? He works there. Church, listen to me. There are so many opportunities for each and every one of us. There's a term I learned in college when I went to school for marketing and finance, and it's called this. It's called points of interruption. If you are a good company who loves to market well to people, what they do is they very slyly put points of interruption with you. Maybe it's a commercial on TV. You ever walk down the aisles at the grocery store and some goofball puts that big cardboard stand up in the middle of the aisle with product on it. You always hit it and you knock it over and then you keep walking acting like you didn't see that you did it. You know what I'm talking about. That's called a point of interruption. It's something that's not normally in front of you. They place it in front of you so you have to see it and then you might take it up on it. Listen, I believe in points of interruption in the church. Points of interruption in church where you interrupt somebody's life with a kind word. You interrupt somebody's life with, let me help you. You interrupt somebody's life with, I want to invest in you. Church, God calls on us to be points of interruption in children's lives. And they desperately need it. I'm talking about loving on them, caring for them, listening to them. You want to really bless a child, you go up to a second grader and you ask them a question, they're going to give you an answer that is off the wall. But if you engage them in that conversation, you have blessed them beyond what you could even imagine. I'm talking about teaching them, mentoring them, doing life with them, maybe even adopting them or sponsoring them. And here's the simple version, church. If you want something that's low key, something that's not going to put you out too much, how about just inviting someone in and just showing them the love of God? I mean, just a kind word. Something to do. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5 says this. It says, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. And I love that verse. That's from the NIV version. But this morning, I found this one. I found a different version. It's from the NLT version. Listen to this. It says, God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Do you realize, church, when we step up and do what God calls us to do, it gives you great pleasure. When you see the impact that you're having on a life, it gives you great pleasure. When my wife brought home them Belarusian kids, it gave me great pleasure to invest in them. Listen, church, God has that intended for each and every one of us. In Psalm 68 even. In Psalm 68, verses 5 and 6, it says this, A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. The part I want you to hear there is this. It says, God sets the lonely in families. Listen to me, church. He is placing these people in front of you. Are you paying attention? Are you looking and seeing, God, what is it you want of me? What is it you want me to do? Because God is so smooth. He's putting them right in front of you. Do you see him? Do you see what he's doing? And when you take up God in whatever form, whatever it is he calls you, and taking care of the children, there's two promises I want to give you in that mode. The first one is this. It's going to be extremely difficult. It's not easy. It is not easy taking care of the orphans. This is not easy taking care of the spiritual orphans. It's frustrating. But you know what? If it doesn't hurt, you're not doing it right. Go ahead, tweet that one, all right? If it doesn't hurt, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. It will take sacrifice. It will take your time, your treasure, your talent. It is going to take you time to stop and recognize a child in need. It's going to take your treasure. God might call on you to spend some money. It might take the talent. Do you realize maybe God has gifted you to communicate with children? And remember, the church is God's plan A. You are plan A. That means he wants you on the front lines. It means you are the one that he has picked to take care of. In church, if the Holy Spirit is nudging you to do something, whatever capacity that God is nudging you to do, then do it. A lot of times I found those who resist the most are the ones who are honestly called the most. I know God has done that in my life. When he really wants me, I put up a fuss and I run hard until I get tired. The ones he calls the most are the ones that put up the most fight. And church, I want you to know something. We at Wellsville First Christian Church, we believe in the sanctity of life. We do. We value all life. I'm talking about we value the life of the unborn child. That's why we support Heartbeat of Columbiana County. We love Heartbeat of Columbiana County. Helping moms make the right decision. We deeply value the life of a baby. The one that's already born, we value that child's life. We deeply value the life of that teenage girl who is scared and pregnant, not knowing what to do, afraid that everyone's going to shun her, and maybe her church will even turn her away. That's not happening here. We deeply value the parents, for whatever reason, who can't take care of their children at this time. We deeply value the kids who come to our Wednesday night youth program who don't get much attention, yet alone spiritual attention. And that's why we invest so much into our youth programs. Church, people just don't need a family. They need a spiritual family. And the church is plan A. We are plan A. So what can you do? Church, it can be as simple as giving a kid a side hug. No full frontal hugs. Give them a side hug. Be smart. Give a kid a side hug. Just tell them they are important. Tell them they look good. Tell them they mean something. Encourage them. It can be as simple as teaching your kids to share what they have with those who are less fortunate. It could be as simple as working Wednesday night in Ignite or Refuge. It could be being a positive role model. Men, listen to me for a minute. These kids are starving for male attention because most of them do not have that. That's why Jerry's a rock star. Men, listen to me. It's time to man up. It's time to step up. It's time to invest. Be a role model. It can be as simple as sponsoring a compassion child. Whatever it is God has laid on your heart, I want you to know we have a responsibility as the church. We have a responsibility as a church because we are God's plan A. So I asked the praise team to come up here today. I want to ask you, church, this. Won't you step into God's calling? Hear me out this morning. Won't you step into God's calling? Every single one of us has something. We have something in our lives that we can invest in the children. Something in our lives to invest in the children. Won't you take him up on it? I'm telling you, you will be crazy blessed. Crazy blessed by investing in the life of a kid, whatever way God calls you to. But I want to tell you something. That's a huge calling on your life, but you know what the most important calling is on your life? Do you know what it is? The main calling that God has on your life is a right relationship with Jesus Christ. Maybe if you don't get any of what I said before this, maybe it's because your life's not right. Maybe if you're sitting there saying, this don't make sense, I wasted my time at church today. No, you didn't. You gotta have it right with him first. That's the main calling on your life. And here's how you can have it right. It doesn't mean you're perfect, believe me. This guy up here wouldn't be preaching if that's what it took. It means this: you recognize that you are a sinner. You recognize this, that you need a Savior. You confess your sins unto him. You invite Jesus Christ in your heart. And church, you follow him in Christian baptism. That's what it takes to be made right. And do you realize this? When you do that, you have secured your place in heaven. You've secured it. Church, it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect after that. Again, this guy wouldn't be up here preaching. It means that God gives you forgiveness. He gives you grace so that you can live your life every single day in the way that he's called you to. So how about it, church? Let's stand together and let's sing, but I really want you to respond today.